Hello, everyone, and welcome to BAMEOTUK UK podcast channel on YouTube. My name is Sherrille. My pronouns are she and her. I am Black British and of Ghanaian heritage. We are both students in training to become occupational therapists. And Emily, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hiya, I'm Emily. My pronouns are she, her, they, or them. I'm British. I'm mixed white and Black Caribbean. So I'm half white, half Jamaican.
Thank you. And today's topic is Let's Talk Racism in Occupational Therapy. At university, we are members of an affinity group of Black minoritized ethnic students and staff in allied health. I will shorten Black minoritized ethnic to BME throughout this podcast. I'm also a member of BAMEOTUK UK network. Both these have enabled critical discussions regarding institutional racism in the occupational therapy profession within the university and wider. This podcast topic came about from my assignment on racism within occupational therapy, and Emily and I thought it would be a good podcast.
I suppose we have to start with the question, what do we mean by racism?
So, according to the Crown Prosecution Service Definition 2020, any incident or crime which is perceived by the victim or any other person to be motivated by hostility or prejudice based on a person's race or perceived race. This definition was agreed with the National Police Chiefs Council to identify racist incidents or crimes and to monitor the decisions and outcomes. The Equality Act 2010 also defined racism, but it's a bit blurry, and it's better to return to the 1976 Race Relations Act's definition. This act is absorbed within the Equality Act. So racial discrimination in the Race Relations Act 1976 makes it unlawful to discriminate on grounds of race, color, nationality, including citizenship, and national or ethnic origin. The Act covers employment, education, training, housing, and the provision of goods, facilities, and services. This legislation includes the topics of victimization and harassment as a separate part.
We're going to talk about what our definitions of racism are.
So I think when discussing racism, it is important to include systemic racism. Systemic racism is defined by the Cambridge Dictionary 2021 as policies and practices that exist throughout a whole society or organization, and that result in and support a continued unfair advantage to some people and unfair or harmful treatment of others based on race. The systems in society are not broken. They're designed to be racist and to use power and control to continue to further marginalize BME people.
I agree. Examples of systemic racism include policing, healthcare, housing, media, education, and the workplace. Systemic racism can also teach people to be racist, such as media portrayals, such as Asian people in the news being always perceived as terrorists, or dark-skinned Black people as the villains in movies and TV shows. The definition of racism I find most helpful is when Patricia Biddle summarized racism equals institutional power plus prejudice. And the terminology racism equals prejudice plus power is still widely used today. Patricia Biddle stated that only white people can be racist because white people are the ones in control of the institutions, and that create and reinforce American cultural values. And I believe that applies to Europe as well. So white people can only really experience racial prejudice, in my opinion, but not racism itself, because white people have right privilege, and that isn't to say they haven't had any problems in their life, but they definitely don't have race as an issue, because systemic racism works in favor of them. So when there's racial prejudice from white people towards BME people, it has so much more power behind it because it has so much more severe consequences. As BME people, our whole lives are surrounded by systemic racism, and we experience the intergenerational trauma of experiencing systemic racism for centuries, and the intergenerational loss of wealth due to all this racism. If, for example, slavery, like we built so many things, but we got no profit from it. And like the Windrush generation. Patricia Badal also stated that racism can be intentional or unintentional. I think it's helpful as it highlights that people can be unintentionally racist. Like Rennie Edo Lodge states, just because you're a nice person doesn't mean that you can't be racist, even if that wasn't your intention. And I think that's really important because I've heard a lot of people say, oh, I can't be racist, I'm so nice. And like, you really don't understand. You need to unlearn a lot of things. So yeah.
No, I completely agree, Emily. Like you said, it's not about just being a nice person that makes you not racist, or I don't see color, you know?
Yeah, that's the worst one, 100%.
Like, oh, my granddaughter's mixed race, or my daughter's going out with a Jamaican guy. You're just like, yeah, still doesn't cut it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, no, thank you for that definition.
Okay. So let's get into it. Why are we discussing racism in occupational therapy?
So first of all, racism has existed for centuries, and the world is very much aware of its existence. And it's no surprise that the occupational therapy profession is racially dominated by white persons. There is limited BME representation. Think what happens if a dominant group does not adjust and adapt its practices when a group from a different culture comes to be permanently amongst them. Now relate this to current occupational therapy.
What do you think about this, viewers?
Yes, it should make us think, Emily. Furthermore, Cronenberg 2020 argues that it wasn't until the Black Lives Matter movement established in 2013, they expressed their public outrage on police brutality, racial injustice within the United States, and the worldwide protest about brutal murder of George Floyd, then forced occupational therapy professional bodies and organizations to finally speak out about racism. So in the UK, occupational therapy staff, educators, and students racialized as BME wrote an open letter expressing their disappointment and concern that the Royal College of Occupational Therapists, which are shortened to RCOT or RCOT, had not put out a statement of solidarity. So regarding their membership who were BME after the murder of George Floyd, but also when the statement was released, another open letter was sent regarding the problems with the release statement.
I guess, Sherrille, we have to ask, as Cronenberg 2020 states, why has it taken our profession 104 years to speak on racism? Would you say, Sherrille, that RCOT were behaving in an institutionally racist way towards their BME membership regarding their delayed response to the murder of George Floyd?
Absolutely. For example, if we take the Macpherson definition in the UK Stephen Lawrence report, 1999, institutional racism is described as the collective failure of an organisation to provide an appropriate and professional service to people because of their colour, their culture, or ethnic origin. That is, racism is emboldened and normalised due to policies, practices, culture, and leadership of the organisation. The end consequence, if racism isn't tackled within occupational therapy, the quality of service provided to the public racialized as BME will not only be unequal, but inequitable. So this inequity of service provision is due to institutional racism, resulting in Eurocentric service delivery. According to Black Hamlin 1992, identified this in healthcare delivery literature. So Crefton and Crefton 1991 define Eurocentrism as a condition where there are services that contribute to the minimization or trivialization of cultures of the global South. This is one problem with cultural competence at best. It creates tick box acceptance and at most minimizing cultures of the global South. Cultural competence is where an individual has learned about a different culture and they suddenly feel like they have ticked the box to show that they're not racist. Whereas the correct term is cultural humility, where an individual isn't defensive about their biased behaviors being addressed, and that individual is willing to be an ally by learning continuously about other cultures and displaying this through the OT process. For example, personalizing interventions to suit the client's cultural wishes. I will give an example of Eurocentrism within occupational therapy practice. So this can be where a Caucasian occupational therapist labels a client racialized as BME as non-compliant, when in fact it's a case of conflicting belief systems. So Dawson 2018 argues that Eurocentrism and stereotyping of a people is a limiting behavior that devalues an individual's potentiality. These are all the references that I've used, and yet we are actually still in the same place.
So Eurocentric service delivery is a manifestation of institutional racism.
Yeah.
Next question. What's the impact of racism on staff and hence occupational therapy staff?
Well, the NHS People Plan 2020 and 2021 and the REST data, REST means work, race and equality standards, state that despite having one of the most ethnically diverse workforces in the public sector, there are long-standing race inequality issues in the NHS workforce. So this includes a lack of ethnic minority representation at senior levels, ethnic minority staff being much more likely to report that they have experienced discrimination at work than their white staff, and fewer ethnic minority staff reporting their trust offers equal opportunities for career progression. So in the 2020 NHS staff survey, 13.1% of staff overall said that they had been at the receiving end of discrimination from patients, service users, and other members of the public. 48.2% stating that this discrimination was due to their ethnic background. And these are only statistics in which people felt comfortable to report this. So that means there could be a lot more.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. So there's also 8.4% who had experienced discrimination from managers or colleagues, as well as experiencing extreme racial discrimination from white service users. The problem is that racist service users are allowed to get away with this despicable behavior, as there is nothing in place that protects occupational therapists from an ethnic background.
Yeah. I think that's a great issue.
So Stanley et al. 2019 states that racial discrimination is recognized as a key social determinant of health and driver of racial ethnic health inequities. Studies have shown that people exposed to racism have poorer health outcomes, particularly for mental health, alongside both reduced access to healthcare and poorer patient experiences.
This will affect morale, cause stress, increase sickness days, which will all add to the NHS costs financially.
Absolutely. Even according to Dawson 2018 and West et al. 2011, research shows that poor morale and engagement among NHS staff have an impact on the quality of patient care.
This suggests that tackling racism and segregation for staff will benefit patients too. Mm-hmm. It should also improve patient care and help the NHS, at least in part, to address racism, make better conditions for BME staff and reduce costly sickness days.
Yeah, I mean, this is important as the NHS plays a vital role in enabling social justice, both as an employer and as a public service, according to Beach et al. 2019. And racism is actually a daily reality for BME occupational therapists and occupational therapy students.
It seems to me that there's growing anecdotal evidence that occupational therapy students of ethnicity have a higher chance of being or risk of being failed abruptly on placement by the hands of the educator, emboldened by institutional racism. They're not listening and learning from BME students' feedback. These examples of institutional racism on placement affects their academic progression, or even some have been said to stop studying occupational therapy altogether. Think about all the occupational therapists we've missed out on. There is need of research and publications in this area.
Yeah, I agree, because RCOT members are invited to apply for board and council positions when they arise, but it was highlighted that BME members may experience barriers to applying for these posts that would not be present for white colleagues. So, for example, application forms are read by white panels. Even if the ethnic identifiers are hidden, the people reading the application are of the old Eurocentric way of understanding. So as they are already of a colonized education, that leads to this Eurocentric mindset. And this is the lens that they'll be viewing the application. That in itself already places a disadvantage for BME members.
I agree. So thinking about the public, what's the impact of racism in occupational therapy on service users?
So As occupational therapists, it is vital to consider how social structures and policies can impact and determine the opportunities for clients from racialized groups. This is according to Hamill 2015 and Fogelberg et al. 2015.
Yes, Arcott's Code of Ethics 2015, in there it states that occupational therapists have a duty of care to all service users and must offer equal access to services without bias or prejudice on the basis of their age, gender, race, nationality, and colour. But their practice should at all times be based on the occupational needs and choices of the service user.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, in addition to this, Arcot 2015 state in their Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct that occupational therapists should be aware of and sensitive to how the above factors affect service users, cultural and lifestyle choices, incorporating this into any service planning, individual assessment, and/or intervention where possible. So Began and Hamill 2017 contend that if well-being can be enhanced by people's engagement in occupations that fulfill their needs, then occupational therapy could make an enormous contribution to society by applying our unique knowledge and skills to help increase the opportunities available for people who are marginalized, and how their occupational opportunities are constrained by the structural factors that shape their life.
On a practical level, what can be done to disrupt racism in occupational therapy service delivery? How do we start the change? And how do we measure success of change? I guess, Sherrille, it isn't a quick fix kind of situation.
It is critical to highlight that there are no simple recommendations that can be put in place to solve racism within occupational therapy quickly. What we have to do urgently is start the meaningful, sustainable change process. So, however, Hammond et al. 2019 and Johnson and LaValle 2020 recommend that an inclusion of anti-racism, cultural sensitivity, diversity and equality strategies should be incorporated in occupational trainings and curriculums in order to enable staff and students to understand the history of racism, as well as the impact it has on individuals. Lianage 2020 indicated that there is a need for a serious discussion about race equality in universities. She continued to state that an investigation is needed regarding how institutions have historically been constructed for Caucasian students and not in favor of students of ethnicity. In comparison, Gibson and Farias 2020 claimed that a key element of decolonizing the curriculum is incorporating Black studies in university curriculums, as it is an area of growing historical importance. So unfortunately, critics have challenged the occupational therapy theories and models and argue that they still permeate the values of late Western capitalism and philosophy. That's according to Awama 2006. In agreement of this, Balia 2016 argues that occupational therapy theories ought to incorporate multiple worldviews and values if they wish to be relevant and inclusive, rather than Eurocentric and potentially culturally unsafe. Another recommendation is for occupational therapists to acknowledge the impact of racism on the client's health and well-being by prompting a discussion of race and culture early in the intervention process, as this displays adequate cultural humility skills, as well as providing person-centered care with a holistic lens. That's according to Chang and Burke 2009. So there's also evidence highlighting the value of including elements of race and culture in interventions for clients racialized as BME, according to Su and Su 1999 and Flicker et al. 2008. Now, as well as suggesting interventions for occupational therapists to acknowledge their racial biases towards service users of ethnicity, it's extremely vital for interventions to be implemented within the workplace to promote equity and diversity among colleagues. So the King's Fund 2020 have recently introduced staff networks, which intend to support BME staff members by granting them the opportunity to discuss race-related issues and for the organisation to deal with any concerns raised from these meetings. It's important that these meetings are chaired by a BME staff member in order for attendees to feel more comfortable. As a direct result of the conversations that occur at these meetings, New training and development programs may be launched, as well as providing accessible coaching and mentoring opportunities to encourage lifelong learning and development.
So to sum up, regarding changes, we need the professional body to lead. That's RCOT. Everybody have anti-racism training, staff educators, practice partners, and students. We must scrutinise the policies and process through a critical race lens. Make sure anti-racism is part of the government structure and really all occupational therapy curriculum embedded with anti-racism, not just a one-off module, but embedded in the design of the curriculum. The success will be seen in occupational therapy in terms of reduction in racism complaints, more BME leaders, more BME staff in teams, anti-racism strategy defined in designs and services and curriculum and more. But most of all, the BME staff feel belonging. Thank you, Sherrille, for your time and sharing on this topic.
Thank you, Emily, in joining me on the podcast.
So here are our references just for you guys to see. I'm gonna go over them for a few seconds each, so in case you want to screenshot them or something. So thank you all for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed our podcast.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Emily. It's amazing working with you. Bye.
Bye.